All right, folks, get ready because today we're going deep on something straight from the headlines. And honestly, right into your UPSC trep. India's three-language formula in education. It's a big one, especially for mains. Trust me.
Absolutely. And we've got this really insightful article from The Hindu we're going to break down. It gets into some stuff that could even help you with prelims. It's that good.
No kidding. This isn't just like, oh, learn one more language. This policy, it impacts students, how fair education is, jobs, everything, really.
And for you all listening, thinking about a career in policy, you got to understand all this, right? It's crucial.
Okay, so three-language formula. Hasn't this been around for a while? Help us out with some background before we get into the current debate.
Yeah, so way back in 1968, it was first recommended. The goal, multilingualism, national integration, all that. Basically, students in India learn three languages, Hindi, English, plus their regional one.
But just saying that doesn't mean it's easy, right?
Exactly. Implementation, always tricky. It's different state to state, which is why there's so much debate and, controversy around it.
And now it's heating up again, right? The National Education Policy, the NEP, is pushing for this formula.
Big time. The NEP has kind of reignited everything, sparking concerns about, will one language become too dominant? Is this even practical?
And today we're zeroing in on Tamil Nadu.
Perfect case study, really. Strong linguistic identity, history of pushing back against Hindi being imposed, shows you just how complex this policy can be.
Okay, let's get to the heart of it. The Hindu dives right into student welfare, which obviously is a huge concern. So for all our UPSC aspirants out there, is learning a third language actually going to help your chances? Seriously.
The million-dollar question, right? The NEP claims it does, talks about cognitive development, national integration, all the good stuff. But is that always how it works? Let's be real.
The article kind of pushes back on that a bit, especially when you look at what's happening on the ground. It mentions the asserts survey from 2024. Big chunk of students, they don't even have basic literacy.
Right.
So if students are already struggling, is adding another language the answer?
And this is where it gets interesting. That ACER finding, it throws a wrench in the whole more languages is better thing. Think about it. If a student can't read or write well in their own language, how are they going to thrive learning two more on top of that? Makes you wonder, what are our priorities in education?
This isn't some theoretical debate either. This is real policy, real consequences. Could easily be a mains question, even a sneaky prelims one.
Oh, absolutely. They could ask you to analyze, like, how effective is this formula given stuff like low literacy rates, or compare different language policies states have tried.
Okay, so let's dig into that cognitive development argument. The article mentions studies showing bilingualism is good for your brain. But does that automatically mean three languages is better?
And here's where cognitive overload comes in. Learning multiple languages can be great, sure, but there's got to be a limit, right? Imagine being hit with new sounds, grammar, vocab, all for three different languages, especially when you're still learning the basics. Overwhelming, to say the least.
Cognitive overload. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, especially if you're prepping for the UPSC, which is a beast.
No kidding. Imagine trying to memorize history, timelines, geography, all that, while also mastering three languages. You'd burn out, not become brilliant. Shows you it's about learning strategically, not just piling on more and more.
So it's not just more is better. This article is making us think about how we actually learn languages, right? There's got to be a sweet spot where it all works best.
You got it. And for you folks, not just as UPSC aspirants, but future policymakers, understanding all this is so important. You might be making decisions about education strategies, where the money goes, how teachers are trained. This all ties into how we learn languages and what it does to our brains.
Okay, we talked brain benefits or overload. Let's get practical. Jobs. The NEP says more languages equals more job opportunities across India. Does our article agree?
Well, not that simple. It says it depends on what kind of job you want. It uses Tamil Nadu as an example. A lot of jobs are within the state. So knowing Tamil is way more useful than Hindi there.
Which makes sense. India is so diverse, each region has its own main language, and lots of people will probably build their careers in that region.
Exactly. And even for national level jobs, English is often more important than another regional language. Think tech, business, research, all that.
So if we're talking career advancement, the article's saying be strategic, right? Good English, solid regional language, then maybe a third based on what you want to do.
Exactly. It's being smart about it. What's going to give you an edge? And for a lot of UPSC folks, English is non-negotiable. You need it for the exams. You need it for a career in the services.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting and honestly a little controversial. The three-language formula, it often gets tied to national integration. So Forcing a third language on people, does that really unite a nation? Let's unpack that.
This is where the article's pretty bold. It says true national integration comes from respecting diversity, not making everyone conform to one language. It's about understanding each other's cultures, shared values, feeling like you belong. All that goes deeper than just speaking the same language. Think about it. India, it's like this huge mix of cultures and languages, right? Trying to force one language on everyone, it risks pushing some communities away. Could even backfire, create more division, not less.
So instead of like a top-down thing, this article is saying we need a more, I don't know, organic kind of unity, one that celebrates all the different languages in India.
Totally. And this is something you can really use for your UPSC essays, How do we get national integration but also respect regional identities and languages? It's tricky, but there's a lot to explore there.
Which brings us to the, well, how do we actually do this?
Yeah.
Implementing the three-language formula. The Hindu gets into the nitty-gritty here, doesn't it? What are some of the big hurdles it points out?
Okay, first one. Right off the bat, not enough teachers. A lot of schools, especially rural ones, they're already struggling to find qualified teachers. Now add a third language, that's a whole other level of complicated. Where are these teachers going to come from? How do we train them? And how do we make sure everyone's getting good quality instruction?
And then there's the money, right? Lots of public schools.
Mm.
They're already strapped for cash. Hiring and training new teachers, creating new curriculum, getting all the materials, that adds up fast.
It does. It's a huge financial undertaking. And the article asks, maybe that money would be better spent on the programs we already have, especially ones focused on basic literacy, getting that foundation solid.
This reminds me of what we were talking about before. If we really care about making education fair, shouldn't we focus on making sure every student has a strong base in their mother tongue and English? Those are the skills that'll help them succeed no matter what.
Absolutely. The article's point is policymakers got to look at what's actually happening, not just the idea behind a policy. It's got to be practical, not just philosophical.
And that's where understanding governance comes in, right? As a future administrator, you might be dealing with this exact stuff, trying to balance what the policy says with what's actually possible. Not always easy, but that's what makes the job so important.
Totally. Imagine you get posted to a district and people are pushing back against the three-language formula. You got to understand the history there, why people feel the way they do, and what might happen if you try different approaches. It's about finding solutions that work for everybody, not just ticking boxes on some policy document.
So we've talked about the potential downsides, but the article isn't all negative. It actually has some suggestions for moving forward, especially for Tamil Nadu. This is great stuff for your mains prep folks, actual solutions, not just arguments.
Definitely. One thing it says, make English language instruction better. That's got to be a priority. Strong English skills, it's crucial for students in Tamil Nadu. Not just for college, but for more job opportunities, especially in today's world. Everything's so global.
Yeah, the article mentioned even some top students from good English medium public schools. They still struggle in college because their English isn't good enough. That shows there's a real problem there.
Big time. And it doesn't stop at just better English teaching. It also talks about a smarter way to introduce Hindi as that third language.
Yeah.
Being aware of the history in Tamil Nadu, how sensitive it is.
Okay, this is where things get tricky. Tamil Nadu has a long history of resisting Hindi being imposed. So what does the article suggest? How do you deal with that?
It says start slow, make Hindi optional, maybe begin in district headquarters, then expand if people want it, if communities are okay with it.
So not forcing it on everyone right away, but giving people the choice. If they see Hindi as useful, they can learn it. Seems more, I don't know, respectful and practical.
It is. It recognizes that Hindi can be helpful, but it also respects what people are worried about, what they prefer. It's a balancing act. And the article's saying you got to be flexible, you got to be sensitive.
This goes back to what we were talking about. You got to understand the situation on the ground, respect how people feel. It's a constant theme. And honestly, I bet you could write a whole UPSC essay just on that.
No doubt. It's like the core of good governance. And this article shows how that applies to something as specific as language policy.
This whole conversation is making me think about the human side of all this. We talked about students, what they need, but what about the teachers? They're the ones who actually have to make this policy happen. If we're adding another language, we need teachers who can teach it well, right?
That's such a good point, and the article does touch on it, though not too much. Think about it. Where are these teachers going to come from? How do we train them? How do we make sure they have what they need to do a good job?
These are all crucial questions. It's easy to talk about policy, in theory, but when you think about actually doing it, the impact on real people, it gets way more complicated.
For sure. It's realizing that teachers, they're at the center of everything. How they're doing, their training, how well they can teach, that's what determines if a policy works or not.
So if we're talking about a balanced approach, like the article says, it's not just about compromising between languages, it's about balancing what students need, what teachers need, what the whole education system needs.
Exactly. This realizing that education policy, it's not simple. There's no one right answer. But if we're critical, we understand the situation, we think about everyone involved, then we can make decisions that actually help people.
This is pure gold for you all listening. The article's approach, focusing on quality education, choosing languages strategically. It's something to think about as you're prepping for the UPSC. It's not just memorizing facts, it's understanding the nuances, being able to explain different sides of things thoughtfully.
It's about realizing education isn't just about knowing stuff, it's about critical thinking, seeing different perspectives, and using what you know in the real world. And that's what the UPSC is all about. Can you think critically, analyze information, and come up with solutions to complex problems?
All right, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. The arguments, the challenges, the potential solutions, all through the lens of the UPSC. But we're not done yet. In the last part, we're going to get even more specific. What challenges and opportunities does this policy create, especially for you, aspiring UPSC candidates? So grab some chai. We'll be right back.
All right, let's tie it all together. We've gone through this three-language formula, the arguments, the realities. Now, what does this mean for you on your UPSC journey?
Seriously, this whole deep dive, it's like a masterclass in potential UPSC essay topics. Education policy, language rights, national integration. How do you actually make these big reforms happen? It's all here.
Imagine you're in that exam hall, you get an essay question. Something about balancing national unity with regional identity. Or maybe they ask you, how effective is this three-language formula? Is it achieving what it's supposed to?
Oh, and don't forget the interview. They love to throw curveballs there. They might ask you, straight up, what's your take on language policy? Especially if you mentioned it in your DAFE.
This is where all this deep dive prep pays off. You'll be able to give them a good answer, one that shows you get it, you understand the different arguments, the challenges, even the solutions the article talked about.
It's not about just repeating stuff back to them. It's about showing you can think for yourself, you see different sides of things, and you can come up with solutions that are actually doable and take into account how complex things are on the ground.
Picture this. You're fresh out of training, a brand new IAS officer. You get posted to a district, and people are fighting against the three-language formula. How do you handle that? How do you balance national policy with what the local people want?
This is where all that UPSC training comes in. History, politics, sociology, even psychology. You got to use all of it to find a solution that works for everyone. You got to be a mediator, someone who brings people together, a leader who can bridge those divides.
The big takeaway from the Hindu article, and honestly from everything we've talked about today, is balance. It's not about blindly enforcing some policy. It's about understanding the details where it could go wrong and figuring out how to make it work in different situations.
It's realizing that education policy, it can't be one size fits all. You got to find solutions that are fair, that work, and that meet the needs of all the students.
And that's something you all, future policymakers, you have the power to change things. You can create an education system that's more inclusive, more fair, that empowers students and makes our nation stronger.
All right, wrapping up this deep dive, we want to hear from you. What really stuck with you? What questions do you have? What challenges are you thinking about? Let us know in the comments. We love to keep the conversation going.
And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives, all focused on helping you with the UPSC. Definitely check out the full article in the Hindu, too. It's packed with good stuff.
Until next time, keep learning, keep those goals high, and keep those minds sharp.